So all of the council members, I really made them work until 2:05 today, and many of them didn't have lunch. I've asked them to resume at 2:15, and as Carlos Manuel proposed, that we will deal with the budget and then have more time in order to complete the negotiations. And that is the council uh, decision based on your informal recommendation. So 2:15. Thank you. Colleagues, if you could, please take your seats.
Hello, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're ready to begin.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for coming back at 2:15 plus some loose change. And as council agreed, I have advised the CEO and the GEF Secretariat to change our agenda so that we go right away to the GEF business plan and corporate budget for FY04. And then after that, to suspend so that we can continue our discussions on the most important and historic project ever on this council, which is the continued deliberations on setting up the new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. Since that is agreeable because the decision was already made, and Carlos Manuel and Secretariat greatly appreciated the work of everyone here who labored until 2:05 in order to land this historic deal. We're almost there. So without further ado, let's jump into the item at hand, GEF Business Plan and Corporate Budget for FY24. I'd like to invite Mr. Peter Lalas to present document GEF C6403, Revision 1, GEF Business Plan and Corporate Budget for FY24.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair, and hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce the GEF Business Plan and Corporate Budget for FY24. This document presents the combined FY24 budget request for the projected administrative expenses of the Secretariat, staff, and the trustee. The FY24 budget request for the Secretariat reflects the core priority to ensure full and effective delivery of the ambitious GEF 8 programming and policy agenda. It aligns to the 4-year administrative budget envelope for GEF 8 set at the replenishment, which provided a significant increase in funding for the Secretariat compared to GEF 7 to meet the GEF 8, the higher GEF 8 ambition and work demands. The 4-year GEF 8 budget continues at the same percentage to overall resources as in GEF 7. The request is also complementary with the initiative led by the GEF CEO to restructure the Secretariat and is an important part of the broader initiative of GEF reform. In this framework, the request reflects the Secretariat's assessment of priority areas of need for which additional staff capacity is required. As elaborated in the budget document, these include the expansion of the financial envelope in GEF 8 by 30%, which results in a corresponding increase in the volume of projects for review and processing to include in work programs and subsequently for CEO endorsement. The ambitious GEF 8 strategy in the 5 focal areas: integration, blended finance, support for the conventions, and the Small Grants Program 2.0. Enhanced engagement with countries, indigenous peoples and local communities, women, youth, and other partners and stakeholders, as has also been discussed in earlier parts of this meeting. And enhanced portfolio management for results, policy implementation, and communications and outreach in support of GEF 8 and the needs of a growing fund. These expanded work needs require, in the assessment of the Secretariat presented in the budget document, require additional capacity and expertise for delivery. As in past years, the FY24 budget also reflects a strong focus on savings and efficiency. For example, the FY24 cost projections on consultant costs go down significantly compared to the current fiscal year as staff capacity is enhanced if approved by Council. The budget also reflects a commitment to use digital connections to enhance efficiencies and save costs, including for travel, outreach, and other cost lines, and efficiencies from the internal restructuring to align to GEF 8 delivery. The budget document also brings to Council's attention 2 unexpected developments relating to GEF's office space and the costs of administrative support from the World Bank. It provides background on these 2 matters, their significant implications, and recommendations for their resolution. Let me just add a few words on the topic of administrative support from the World Bank, as we have just received a new communication from the World Bank Budget Office. As explained in the budget document presented to Council, the GEF Secretariat currently pays the World Bank approximately $1.025 million US dollars for the much appreciated administrative support received from the World Bank through a system of direct payment. Based on GEF governance, business needs, and situation, our analysis indicated in the budget document is that this could appropriately be raised to the higher figure of $1.925 million, which would be equal to a charge rate of 7% of the costs of everything else in the GEF Secretariat administrative budget. The World Bank Budget Office has been proposing a much higher level. And this story, again, is explained. We wanted to present the information in the document. So, In the interests of compromise and common ground, we have proposed, as part of the decision and Table 2 in the document, a charge rate for World Bank administrative support, an administrative charge rate of $3.026 million US dollars, equal to an 11% rate. 2 weeks ago, after we posted the document, we received an updated proposal from the, as I mentioned, from the World Bank Budget Office. Just clarified yesterday in another communication from them, this would result in a charge of $4.28 million for FY24, with costs of legal support on top of that. Based on what I was just mentioning, this is far above the cost of the amount recommended in our budget document, and even farther above what GEF analysis indicates is appropriate and what we pay for currently. We've just consulted on this with the GEF Independent Evaluation Office. We're working through this in this dialogue together. We share the view that under existing administrative GEF 8 budget levels, this significantly higher cost would disrupt and prevent work program delivery. We believe this is not a viable outcome for the GEF in the interests of the partnership, and we hope that the Council decision on these matters, as recommended in the budget document before you, will lead the way to their expeditious and successful resolution. Finally, the document before you presents the budget requests for STAP, the trustee, the CBIT Trust Fund, and the Nagoya Protocol Implementation Trust Fund. The recommended Council decision is set out on page 2 of the Council paper. Thank you very much. And I think now the CEO, Carlos Manuel, will also say some additional words.
Thank you, Peter. Let me add a few words to the presentation of this document. As you can all understand, this is a very important document for decision for the Secretariat. It reflects not only our budget requests for fiscal year 24, but my broader vision for our work in going forward, including on enhancing Secretariat capacity in the delivery of GEF 8 and on the GEF restructuring, which is a critical component of the overall GEF reform. Some of you will hear more about this in our lunch tomorrow, and I'm very excited about the possibilities ahead of us. Let me also say a few words about the issue with regards to the World Bank. We sincerely hoped that the Council decision will lead the way for the rapid and successful resolution of this issue. These issues have lingered for too long. It has been put on the Secretariat, the Independent Evaluation Office, and our colleagues at the Adaptation Fund Secretariat are in a difficult and potentially unstable position. The resolution recommends in the document on both issues is readily available. It reflects compromise on our side in the spirit of finding common ground. These issues need to be settled and as soon as possible, so we can turn to our full attention to the collectively focusing of the critical work before us. I had tried to avoid bringing these issues to Council and have been working hard with my team in the last year and a half to resolve them separately, but these discussions are now at a stage where I need your guidance, Council, and your assistance. With that, I thank you. I turn back over to the co-chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Carlos Manuel. So the floor is open for questions and comments. Please raise your flag as per usual. Thank you, Karen. Go ahead. Sweden.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. I still have a question. So what do we need to take a decision about? Is it the new, and the World Bank proposal was 4.8, which is 14%, is it? Or you want us to decide on the 11% that you suggest? And if we do, and the World Bank doesn't agree on that, what will happen then? Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Alf Frieso, you're next.
Yes, thank you. So our constituency would like to thank the Secretariat and Trustee for the business plan and the corporate budget for fiscal year 24. We are very concerned and uneasy about the difficult discussions with the World Bank on administrative costs and office space. So regarding the significant increase in administrative costs, as you said, the Secretariat has calculated the proper cost recovery rate to be around 7% of direct costs. However, the Secretariat is saying that a rate of 11% could be considered for approval. And this would be 4% higher than the Secretariat's calculation of a correct recovery rate. And the World Bank at the same time is asking for 18%, which has been somewhat reduced now in the latest offer. This is very confusing to us. So we would ask for some more information and clarity around the differences in the calculations. We would like to know how these calculations relate to the relevant decisions by the World Bank Board in terms of cost recovery, because that's something we're having difficulty comprehending. For us, in principle, it would make sense that the GEF Secretariat only pays for real services delivered by the World Bank, and only once. This shouldn't be a matter of pure negotiation, although we've been informed that boards of other FIFs have been negotiating revised percentages. And as Karin asked, what will happen if the World Bank refuses the 11%, which is in the budget and says that it covered the World Bank's host services? What happens if we approve something that's not accepted by the World Bank host? Also, under the 11% scenario, the GEF Secretariat would manage to stay within the administrative budget approved during the replenishment, thanks to savings from GEF 7. Savings which otherwise could be instead used for programming. And then once GEF 7 savings are used up, how will these extra costs be covered in the following years? That's not clear for us. And then regarding the two alternatives suggested in the document to solve the long-term lease situation for the office space. So what role does the council have? Who decides who will pay for the higher lease costs in fiscal year 23 due to the bank's refusal to sign more than a one-year lease contract? How will the situation be resolved, also in light of the plans to expand the staff of the GEF Secretariat? And how can council support the GEF Secretariat in this situation? It's important to find a long-term solution which gives predictability to the GEF Secretariat. We also believe that the issue of administrative costs and the office lease should be delinked. They are separate issues. And then we also request that the GEF Secretariat reports regularly to the council and in between meetings on the developments linked to these two issues, the administrative costs and the office rent, so that we have a continuous information about what is happening. So otherwise, we are happy to note that staff will be hired to work on blended finance and private sector engagement. This is an important area of work for the GEF, which needs to be appropriately staffed with relevant experience. We also support the increased focus on measuring achieved results and reporting to the council, including on risks and challenges. We are very pleased to read that you are continuing your work on greening your workplace. Our constituency expects that all our partners reduce the emissions and other negative environmental effects of their own operations. We understand that the Adaptation Fund reported to its board earlier this year on the carbon footprint of its operations. Since the Adaptation Fund and the GEF share offices, we would like to suggest or request the GEF Secretariat to also report on its carbon footprint and suggest further actions for greenings its operations and report back to the council, possibly at the 66th meeting. We are pleased to note the suggested model of organizing one virtual and one physical council meeting per year, and we would encourage organizing consultations with relevant actors in recipient countries in connection with council meetings, both civil society organizations and private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alf. Gabriella from Switzerland.
Thank you very much, Tom. Well, first, we have to ensure that with this budget, that the GEFSEC can effectively implement the GEF 8 programming directions and the policy package. The staffing and finances should therefore be focused on this aspect, and the increased admin costs due to the cost recovery policy cannot be at the cost of urgently needed staff increase. I think that's a very important aspect for us. And it can also not go at the cost, for, especially of the star allocation and the IP set aside, because we know that's more or less already programmed, almost all of it, in the context of this, the set aside, in the context of this work program. I think it's really important that that those are like cornerstones that we keep in mind. And the lease issue and the cost recovery issue need to be settled as soon as possible. In particular, the lease issue, we do not want to be in a situation as we were at the end of last year. That was not a very pleasant one, neither for those council members involved, nor particularly not for the Secretariat, the IEO, and the Adaptation Fund Secretariat. So that's really not what we want to repeat. And to make it very clear to the World Bank Group that that's the intention of the council, and I mean the council and not the Secretariat, the council of this fund, we would want to add language that very explicitly refers to that and makes it very clear. On the 11%, hearing Norway, yeah, we have similar concerns. It feels a bit like a bazaar. And that's not usually how we do things. So, but we're willing to support the 11% as an upper threshold for negotiations with the World Bank Group. And we would request the World Bank Group to come and present at the 65th Council meeting, which we understand will be a virtual one. Whatever percentage we land at, which would be 11 or below, is how those costs are actually justified. Like, we need to understand where these costs come from, and not in a terms of bizarre negotiation, but actually understanding what the underlying logic is of the costs associated with it. Yeah, those are the core elements around the quite significant budget increase. Then we have some more specific questions. We would like to know what the flight travel policy is, whether you could recall that. Do you fly economy, business class? You have hour limitations just to capture that. Then you have the risk assessment included in the consultant planning of the document. We know there's more effort on this also within the Secretariat, in particular related to the enhanced portfolio management, but also in relation to the risk-taking versus innovation kind of positive aspect of risk-taking. So we'd be interested to hear how you're planning around that staffing element, because it wasn't clear for us from the document. And then the single project approval modality that will hopefully be agreed in the context of the GBFF establishment and programming directions. And we understand there will be simplification suggestions coming forward also at the next council meeting for the GEF overall. For us, it's really important that any such simplification project modality comes with improved checks and balances, which are absolutely necessary. And they need adequate risk management and very strong policy safeguard assurance within the Secretariat. So we need to get the assurance that there is the Secretariat staff in the Secretariat that can ensure these checks and balances, especially on the policy side. So we're interested to hear what you're planning along these lines, and we look forward to the lunch tomorrow on the restructuring. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriella. So Abby from the United States.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you to Peter and to the Secretariat for this, the preparation of this budget. We are generally in agreement with the FY24 business plan and budget. We find the approach on the question of administrative spending to be sound, and I mean we find the GEF's approach on administrative spending to be sound. And we do note that, in particular, without the change in the cost of World Bank administrative support services, the difference between the FY23 and FY24 budgets would have been negligible. Specifically on this cost recovery issue, we appreciate the Secretariat's efforts to find a middle ground with the IBRD, not the EBRD, on the administrative cost recovery issues. We are dealing with this issue across multiple FIFs, and it's fair to say that the process has been very messy, and the IBRD in its administrative arm of the IBRD has not been very communicative toward the councils. Consistent with what Gabriella said, we are willing to go along with the GEF's proposal of 11% as an upper limit for the cost recovery for FY24. We do not see this as a precedent for upcoming years, and we hope that a lower rate could be negotiated in the future. As a council, I don't think that we should be entertaining the offer or the communication you had with the bank about a higher cost recovery number. That was not circulated to us as a council before this meeting, and it's not really, in my mind, a formal proposal from them, and we certainly don't have enough information about this. One thing I will say, in agreement with Gabriella, again, I do think we should have something very explicit in the council text about the 11% limit on the cost recovery, and I also think that it's a good, because I think that makes the will of the council very clear, as opposed to the decision text now, which has it kind of implicit. I also like the idea of inviting the bank in its administrative capacity to present to the council in Council 65. They probably should have done this presentation during GEF 8. When we were agreeing the budget envelope for GEF 8, but you know, we are where we are. With respect to some of the other issues, we agree with the GEF's proposal to convert some consultant positions to regular staff positions. We think that this is reasonable given the increase in the size of the replenishment and the expected new responsibilities, and it obviously will help you maintain a stable workforce and maintain institutional expertise that people accumulate as they work on issues. We also want to stress very much that we do think the GEF focus, although much of the conversation today has been on other issues, we do think that the GEF's focus in terms of work should be on the GEF 8 work program, and we hope that resources are not diverted disproportionately to newer work streams that could be coming on, like the GVFF and the BBNJ, because we did have a very ambitious replenishment and there is a lot to be accomplished there. So we want to stress that. On this question of office space, like Gabriella, we very much think that this, would like to have this settled soon. I think that it has been clear that the situation has been quite disruptive for the GEF, for the Independent Evaluation Office, and also for the Adaptation Fund Secretariat, since they happen to share space with you. It is also the case right now that the commercial office space market in the District of Columbia is facing extremely high vacancy levels. So if ever there was a good time to negotiate a good long-term lease rate, it should be this year, because telework has kind of savaged the market. So we think you should be in a good position to get a good lease. Therefore, we think it's important to use this council meeting to resolve this issue. And so we would like to propose that the council decision include explicit text on this. And the text, which I can read out, but I can also share with you, would be that the council calls upon the IBRG as administrative host to work with the GEF Secretariat to speedily resolve the GEF office space question, so that the GEF's work and the administrative budget of the GEF is not further disrupted by temporary measures. And then with respect to one other aspect of the work program or budget in here, you propose a mix of virtual meetings and in-person meetings, and the text also suggests that the in-person meetings will not be in DC, but then I've also heard that they would be in DC. I think that we are, as a council member, very open to doing a mix of virtual meetings and in-person meetings. We think that would probably be a little easier if you had a kind of rotation of when in-person meetings would be in DC and when they would be outside of Washington. My experience on other fund councils has demonstrated that sometimes having an expectation of having that every year is actually a challenge in terms of managing the logistics of it. So I think having a regular rotation schedule would be better. I also want to just emphasize one other thing, which we're experiencing this week in particular. I do think it's very important that the GEF Secretariat work closely with the secretariats of other similar funds, so that the dates and locations of the different council meetings and other governing body meetings are spaced out in such a way that it allows all council members to participate and to be adequately prepared. Because we seem to run into a traffic jam at certain times of the year, and I think that it would be useful to really give some more thought to doing this. So to conclude, with respect to the decision text, we agree with Gabriella's proposal that there's something explicit in the decision text about the administrative cost recovery fee. And we also would propose to the council that there's something explicit in there about resolving the office lease question quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. So we will go to the CSO network, and then after that, Rajender from India, and then we'll revert to Peter for just a few comments. Go ahead, CSO network.
Thank you very much. This being the first time for me attending this council, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Tumain Charles Marjani, regional focal point for East Africa. On behalf of the GEF CSO network, I would like to share reflections from the GEF CSO network regarding agenda item number 3, GEF business plan and corporate budget for the year 2024. And mainly, we have some observation, and one is inclusiveness. In the area of inclusiveness, the budgetary application for supporting CSO is a special key activity that we request to continue supporting the CSO network and putting more emphasis on the groups that are key and fundamental in environmental conservation, such as youth and women. And number 2, about monitoring and evaluation. One is we request that focus is made on short-term and long-term in order to address the development that youth and women are putting in making sure that we have sustainability in environmental conservation. And in regard to CSO members, we have the following observation. One, yes, we have, especially going to page 2, subsection 7, the GEF Secretariat, budget request activities and output, subsection 7, bullet number 6, the statement engaging with civil society, indigenous people, as well as local community, women, private sector, philanthropies, as well as other non-state actors, stakeholders. That statement would like at least to put into consideration of this council that, yes, we have a big issue of resource allocation. Yes, we see that youth and women and other important key groups are mentioned, but globally it has been an issue on how much financial resources are allocated to support those activities that relate to youth group and women. And also, some of the key issues that CSO members would like to bring into this council is regard on the support for the regional climate summit, which will help youth and women, as well as the CSO members, to discuss the challenges as well as the opportunities at regional level before attending the GEF council meeting, as well as the GEF assembly. So we put more emphasis and consideration that if we could allocate more budget to support the regional and national climate summit. And to finalize, would like to put an important note that it is very important for the council to consider that youth and women and CSO members are key in implementing sustainable programs in making sure that our climate programs are well implemented. And therefore, we bring to this council that, yes, the budget and the business plan for GEF has well explained the involvement of CSO, youth and women, but the global problem is not about including youth and women in CSO, but the amount of financial resources allocated. So as a forum of CSO globally, we would like to advise, as a general comment, that year in, year out, to increase the budget allocation to support CSO and to support special group like youth and women, because we believe that more youth and women and CSO organization, if they are involved every financial year, if there is some increase in budget allocation, we know there will be sustainability in implementing GEF activity. Thank you.
Thank you for your contributions. Rajinder from India.
Thank you, Chair. First, a small observation that there are, the Secretariat may clarify, separate allocations have been made for administrative costs for trustee, for NPIF, CBIT, and GEF, instead of combining and less accounting. Maybe there are compulsive regions which may be clarified. Second is a substantive issue, and I echo the sentiment expressed by Gabriela and Abby on the increased administrative cost of the GEF. And we'd also like to know what exactly has happened. How World Bank is justifying this sudden increase of 11% cost, and especially if we refer to para 81, this is an increase of approximately 300% compared to the cost for support from the World Bank paid in FY23. So by any means of justification, it seems to be inappropriate and unjustified, 300% rise. But the World Bank must have given its reason and what has been the negotiation and what has been the outcome. And maybe, as expressed by Gabriela, we may request bank to present its case, but that may be too late. In between, what is our strategy to negotiate and to deal with the bank on this issue? And if this is the constant component for coming time, then it's increased incremental burden for all times to come. So maybe, GEF Secretariat may clarify how to deal with this issue on temporary and transient manner, and also what is the strategy to deal with it on a permanent basis. With this, back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Rajinder. It's Peter, and I assume the CEO wants to speak too.
All right, well, whoops. Thank you very much for the questions and the comments, the support for major parts of the document. We greatly appreciate it. And of course, the very good questions about the status and the situation with these two issues that we have with the World Bank. Maybe I'll start with those because I think they came up at the very beginning from, I think it was Alf, especially, in Sweden, as well, who were asking, what is this new information from the World Bank Budget Office? Is it 14%? What was the nature of the communication? And then Alf going beyond that, that there's so many numbers here, it's confusing, and I really appreciate that. We're sorry about all the numbers. Actually, we wanted to mention the latest World Bank communication. We just got the clarification on it yesterday. We received it a couple of weeks ago from the Budget Office, and it had a mention of a rate of 14%, but we couldn't understand how that was calculated, and so the CEO got back to them immediately to ask, and it turned out it's a calculation that's different from the way that's in Table 2 of our budget document, and so this was one of the clarifications we were requesting. It's a calculation of the amount on not just the total costs other than indirect costs, but on the total costs, including the indirect cost that's being calculated. And I'm sorry to get into the details, but what we wanted to do was present in my statement and in the paper what the actual amounts would be. And so, as we mentioned in the budget document that we presented, the GEF Secretariat's analysis, and we've been in an extensive dialogue with our colleagues and counterparts, and we appreciate that. We've gone line by line on the different elements of what would be in an indirect charge based on GEF's governance, business needs, and situation. And there's a whole bunch of administrative support lines. Mapped to GEF, our assessment is that the most accurate amount would be a 7% figure. It's $1.9 or $2 million. But the World Bank had thought that it was a higher level, and so that's what we presented in our budget document in the interest of compromise, this amount of $3 million, 11%. Indeed, it's a 300% increase over what we pay now. We felt that that was what we could, justify to present to Council for consideration. And so, though the World Bank is asking in their latest communication as well, even for a higher amount, up to 4.3 million, as I mentioned. What we therefore are suggesting in the budget paper is the 11% figure as shown in Table 2, and this would be adopted as part of the recommended budget. We had also suggested, this goes to the question of going forward, the idea of reviewing this in 3 years' time so we could work with our colleagues and with everyone else to have the additional time and data to determine if it's, an adjustment is needed either up or down. I mean, as we mentioned, we think actually this is a little higher than it should be. But, that's a fair question. And so we thought that that could be also part of a solution. Now, on the office space issue, we have also recommended a solution in the document. It's in the paper, which is part of the decision, but it's implicit. So essentially, the fixed cost line on office space includes a cost which is based on the assumption, and it's our hope, that we would find agreement so that the long-term lease for the existing GEF office spaces could be renewed. And so we've budgeted on that basis, say it would take the summertime or the DC summertime through until September to work that out. And so it's embedded in the decision, and that's what we tried to explain. It could certainly be made more explicit, and we very much appreciate the suggestions from Abby and Gabriella and some others to make it more explicit in the language, because as our CEO has mentioned, this dialogue has lingered. And we've really worked with the team, I want to recognize Juha and Gita over there, and with our colleagues at the Adaptation Fund Secretariat. We've been doing this collectively to try and understand the best resolution, the best resolution on both of these two issues. But if it's possible to have additional clarity in the decisions, as we have said, we hope that that will lead the way to an agreement on both of them. So we would, of course, take the decision of GEF Council back to the colleagues at the World Bank in the hopes that this would be a resolution which we could solve as expeditiously and positively as possible. But I do think the suggestions, if I may say, and the CEO may want to come in, about intersessional report, if that's appropriate, on what the status is, and having a follow-up discussion if needed, at the December council meeting to see what the status of things, or if helpful, to have the World Bank present their views if we can't come to an agreement at 11%. And then, of course, I think that would be, it sounds like a very important approach, because we do need that's why we wanted to present all this information to GEF Council, because we've worked for many, many months now, but haven't quite been able to resolve the issues. I would say that there is a time sensitivity on the office space question. When we went to the one-year lease extension compared to what was negotiated last year for a 6-year extension, it was not only more costly because of the change that happened at the end of last year, but it also, Carlos Manuel mentioned, we're in a situation of some instability and risk. Our offices could be rented away. We know that now. I mean, we have a one-year lease, but it is possible that if there's someone that comes along at any time, starting February 1st of next year, we would lose our offices. And so this is why we've been actually wanting to work with the World Bank to resolve that. The resolution we suggest in the document is either in two possibilities. One is that, as the World Bank has done for many, many years, they would sign the lease on GEF's behalf. We worked very cooperatively with them to negotiate it. It had very favorable terms. Abby mentioned the market conditions in Washington, D.C., so it was a really good deal, really good deal. They could, as they have in the past, sign that, and we explain the reasons why we think it's appropriate in the document. The other possibility, and we've chatted with the legal counsel at the World Bank, who have been very helpful to us, is that they would simply confirm that under World Bank policy on signature authority, the CEO of the GEF has the authority and is able to sign this long-term lease renewal. So we think either of those, the landlord, when we last communicated, that lease is still on the table, that lease renewal for the longer-term office space. It would provide stability for the Secretariat. It would meet the governance needs that we've mentioned in the document about being not in World Bank-owned property, and it's configured to our needs. And so this resolution is also suggested in the document and in the decision. If we get there, we hope that the council decision would help us get there, but then of course we have to get there after the meetings. We do know that. Let me just go through a couple. I wanted to take those questions as a group. Let me just go individually to see if I've captured report to council in between sessions. I think Alfred mentioned that. That's one of the things I think, of course, we would be, let me confirm with the CEO, but we would be glad to keep council informed. Thanks for the comments and the support on the increased investments in blended finance, on portfolio management, on greening the workplace, and reporting on the carbon footprint. We'll be glad to do that. I should mention, it's in the document, that in the long-term lease that we had negotiated until it was stopped in December, we had worked with, in the negotiations, the landlord included language, and we did with them, on the possibility of putting solar panels on the rooftop. There's a rooftop up there, and we thought we could even make an example in D.C. to try and spread the practice of solar panels on office building rooftops, that may be in the World Bank group as well. We've been following up diligently on that. We have a budget in there and the proposed budget on that. Thank you very much for those comments. Gabriela, you mentioned also going forward the idea that 11%, the intent of council is to be clear on the lease, and that 11% at this stage, if I understood correctly, would be the 11% or below. And then to help understand the elements of that discussion, it could be that there would be, I think some others have said, follow-up, if helpful, presentation from the World Bank. We tried to present in the document the reasoning behind why we thought the World Bank proposal of 18%, or you could say 22%, depending on how you calculate, was too high for the GEF. It's based on our business needs and our governance. We handle many and we pay for many of the items in the indirect charge ourselves from the GEF Trust Fund. We felt like the application of the methodology that the World Bank used, which was World Bank-wide, applying an updated cost recovery percentage rate to the GEF, didn't fit very well. And there were many examples in the cost table that we received from the World Bank on legal support, on budget support, on HR support, And I think we mentioned, those are mentioned in the annex. You know, we saw that the recommended cost from the World Bank for legal support would be $400,000 a year for the GEF Secretariat. It's multiples above what we need and what our practice has shown. The recommended cost for the budget support from the World Bank would be $800,000. It's multiples above what we think is justified for the GEF. On HR, the human resources, we don't pay for HR right now support, and that's why we think it's fair to increase what we pay compared to what we pay now, previously. So we have included that in our 7% and even 11%, but the proposal we received from the organization would have us paying sort of a full cost rate that's applied across all units of the World Bank, including operational units, who receive many HR services, such as batch match, rotations, you know, talent reviews, that are not available to the GEF Secretariat. And so we just felt that one. Maybe I'll give one other example because some folks asked for the analysis. There's also a standard charge rate for institutional integrity. This is the World Bank office that investigates fraud and corruption allegations, and it's a very crucial part of the checks and balances. For the GEF, our business model is different. We rely on the agencies to do that. I mean, it could theoretically happen in the GEF Secretariat that there's a case of you know, issue of misuse of funds or something like that, but it really never has. There are many fiduciary-related cases. I'm the Conflict Resolution Commissioner out in the field. Those are handled under GEF policy and governance by the GEF agencies, and so we felt it was not justified to charge that same rate to the GEF Secretariat because and we're paying an agency fee to all the agencies to cover the cost of implementation from the GEF Trust Fund. So we've been, you know, doing this work really to try and get a fair deal, the best deal and appropriate deal for the GEF Trust Fund, but also for the World Bank. I mean, we did want to, you know, there are some emergency services and other features that we felt, yes, we should be paying because we're part of the system over there, and they're much appreciated. So let me see. So on I think it was Gabriella, you said that assuming that the staffing increases also would apply to support the critical function of checks and balances and for safeguards. Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, we've emphasized in several different parts of the document that the policy framework of the GEF is crucial for good quality projects, for accountability, for including people. That's why we have, of course, the grievance response system. It's another safeguard. It's very, you know, with the expanding volume of projects and programs and integration that we have, we need to have the additional staff and the expertise to make sure that we're helping, playing the role of the Secretariat actively to spot issues, to have checks and balances in the system when we review projects, to look at the safeguards and the gender equality and the stakeholder engagement aspects. And so that's very fundamental, I think. I don't know if that answers your question, but we do have that in there. Abby, the U.S., thank you very much on the general agreement with the budget. And for the appreciation of the effort to find common ground. We are aware that this is messy not only for, the discussions. There's a dialogue across different types of trust funds, including the SIFs. Maybe they're talking about it across the street, I don't know, this week. And yeah, yes, I see that well. And the Global Partnership for Education. We have been in touch, although the GEF has its own system, and we're trying to help make sure that we just give the best information and come to the best conclusions possible. But thank you for also saying 11% is an upper limit, that we hope a lower rate can be negotiated. So do we, because this money does matter, as I think it was another one or two interventions, that money we apply here, which is for administrative services from the World Bank, if it goes too high, it's taking away money from climate change work, from nature work, from the delivery of GEF aid. And so that's why, even though this is a difficult and painful discussion, we're working so hard on it. We would welcome more explicit language in the decision on these things if you would, then we leave that in your hands. And on, yes, I mean, you see we're making a proposal to increase our staff to deliver GEF 8. That's embedded in the decision, but at the same time, going along with that, and we mentioned it at the discussion last year at Council, we will decrease the costs for consultant, and you see especially there's a 20% or 21% increase in the decrease in the cost of extended ETCs, which corresponds, and then also in short-term consultants corresponds to the work would be taken up by staff, and we don't need the extra consultant costs. let me see, the civil society intervention, thank you very much for that. I took from that the need to emphasize the engagement and the financial support from the GEF for indigenous communities, women, and for sustainability, and referencing a part of the decision. Yes, indeed, as we've indicated through the updated vision for engagement with civil society, the policy on engagement with stakeholders, the work with indigenous communities, and the advisory group, we already have a number of means that we're trying to do that very strongly. But there are also things that we are proposing that we hope we can do more. And if you look at the box 1 in the budget document, this is the GEF reform that the CEO mentioned. You'll see one of the pillars of GEF reform is greater engagement and greater support for civil society, indigenous peoples, women, and youth, including, if that means, the need to amend the GEF instrument the next time around. And we also, if I might just mention, last December at the last council meeting, there was the adoption of the updated the country engagement strategy, which has several budget lines which we think will be very helpful for civil society engagement. One of those is to support participation in conventions and related meetings. Another one is the Gustavo Fonseca Young Conservation Scientists Fund, which, we lost our dear friend, and so with the Council's approval, we've dedicated funds to support the development of young scientists in tropical countries, just like Gustavo was. And so we want to keep moving forward on that. India, you asked about separate budgets for the CBIT and the Nagoya Protocol Implementation Fund. Why is the trustee and the GEF Secretariat separate? That's the way we've always done it. It's just like if you look at the bigger budget itself, the overall budget document, the first section is about the GEF Secretariat, and then you have another budget which is the trustee. And so in each of those different trust funds, we keep that same separation because I think it provides an additional level of information to council about what the respective roles are between the Secretariat and the trustee to support those activities. And yeah, you mentioned it's an increased cost of 300% in administrative costs, even at 11%. Doesn't seem justified. As we've explained, we think 7% actually would be quite appropriate. We've proposed 11% to try to find common ground. The reasoning, I think I explained, there was a methodology followed by the World Bank in developing the updated cost recovery framework. We didn't get engaged in that. And so there may have been an absence of an understanding, which is what we've been discussing, about the uniqueness of GEF governance, business needs, and situation. And so how that rate applied without taking that into account doesn't fit the GEF. And the strategy to negotiate, will this be forever? Strategy to negotiate with the World Bank and forever, is this going to happen forever? I mentioned the possibility of we could have a 3-year look ahead to make sure if we go for the 11%, to make sure that we get it right in advance of GEF 9. Maybe that would be a helpful way also to program things. And negotiation with the World Bank, well, I think the idea, as the CEO mentioned, is we hope a council decision that provides clarity on these matters would provide a basis for the follow-up discussion that would hopefully lead to an expeditious resolution. Carlos Manuel.
Thank you, Peter. Juha?
Thank you so much. And right, so I don't have prepared remarks for this this session, but I can just talk a little bit about the implications for the Independent Evaluation Office of these cost recovery proposals. And as you know, so evaluation is very fundamental to the GEF instrument and to the GEF mechanism, so that we have a system whereby independently verify the effectiveness, the results, and the impact and efficiency of the GEF partnership. So evaluation has been always built into this system. I am very thankful for the fact that the council and the replenishment process for the GEF 8 process actually increased our budget rather significantly. from about $23.5 million to a round figure of $30 million. Now we have prepared a budget that we have presented to you on, or will present to you probably tomorrow, on based on this additional cost recovery fee of 11%. And this has quite significant implications for our work program. So if we look at it at an annual basis, so the fiscal 24 budget that we would have normally had on based on the $30 million would have been $7.1 million. Now, if you take the 11% out of that, so that's a $800,000 reduction. We may be able to live with that, but it's going to make things rather tight. I should say that there is a $430,000 carryover from GEF 7 budget, which I am getting slightly contradicting advice on whether we would be able to carry it over to or not. But obviously that would mitigate our budget shortfall by about half. But of course that is only for 1 year. So the longer term implications would still be quite significant. And if we were to go to 14%, as has been suggested now, that would be a blow. It would have implications on OPS 8, the 8th comprehensive evaluation of the GEF, which might be slightly less comprehensive in that case, because we would have to deal with that. We haven't, mind you, by the way, we haven't suggested any staffing increases at this stage. Which we might actually want to do at some point of time, given the fact that the GEF mandate has been growing, and we've been talking about things here, such as the midterm evaluation of the resource allocations. We've been talking about obviously the GBFF and so on, which we don't know exactly what the implications will be, but if we do have to provide comprehensive evaluation services to the partnership based on these things, so it would make kind of a sense for us to also increase our staffing structure, but that is not there. But so basically, just to round it up, is basically the fact is that with an 11% decrease, not to mention a 14% charge to the IEO budget, and given where we stand with inflation and all of that, all of the increase of the budget that the replenishment process provided to IEO would be gone. We would, in fact, be at the level of GEF 7 evaluation budget, or actually below that. So we would see an actual decrease in evaluation funding for the GEF 8. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Juha. All I can summarize from what you said is that it's going to hurt. So, without further ado, the next list of speakers are Hongxia, Laura from Finland, Annette, Richard, Ben. So, Hongxia from China.
Thank you. And many thanks for the Secretariat for preparing the document and also the presentation and many explanations. I have 3 points to share. First, we in principle agree with the GF business plan and corporate budget for, for fiscal year 24, which duly reflect the expanded missions and responsibilities of the Secretariat during the GF8, with 2 new mandates regarding the GBF fund and the BBNJ. Second, we notice the projection of more than 30 increase of operations, and therefore we recognize the need for staff restructuring, or either by recruiting more staff while reducing the reliance on the STC and ETCs. And I still remember the interview taken by the third party looking into the same set of issues. So it deserves the attention in the next 2 or 3 years. Third, on the budget related to office space and administrative cost, we discussed a lot in the with previous speakers. So we noticed the budget plan submitted for approval was developed based on the Secretariat proposed solution, which is 11%, and which is still subject to the outcome of the coordination with the World Bank. I'm just wondering a few questions for the Secretariat. What is the standard or the unified fee rate of the World Bank Group applied to all the FIFs? Second, is there do we have any like a backup plan if the negotiation with the bank does not proceed as expected? And also, what will be the legal implication for the approval process by the Council? So I think these are important issues that deserve further clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Hongsha. So, Laura from Finland.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Yeah, I can only echo what the colleagues have already said on this agenda point. It's very unfortunate that the GEF and the World Bank have not managed to solve these unexpected developments on office space and administrative fee. I mean, the rise of 11% seems very high and is our upper limit, and we hope it won't come at the expense of the work program. And like already mentioned, the Secretariat is very useful if you can report us between the councils how these 2 issues are progressing. I would have only 3 points I would like to raise on the fiscal year 24 budget. Otherwise the higher budget for fiscal year 24 otherwise rightly reflects the new responsibilities that GEF has taken on. For instance, being or becoming a financial mechanism for new funds. And we are also happy that the GEF is enhancing efficiency and integrating core work responsibilities via more clear and integrated lines of reporting and responsibilities. And thirdly, we are also welcoming the focus on more results-based development. As GEF is stating in the document, it's raising the bar to put more focus on managing for environmental results. As the political atmosphere in several of our countries is maybe changing to more critical towards development aid, it's ever more important to be able to show what kind of results we are gaining with the funding we are giving. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Annette from Germany.
Thank you very much. Germany welcomes the detailed presentation of the administrative budget for financial year 2024, 2024, and would like to thank the Secretariat and everybody else involved for its efforts. We recognize the additional work with the establishment of the GBF fund and initial pre-ratification support for action on BBNJ that will increase the staff cost, increasing the in-house human capacity while reducing the budget for external consultants seems like the adequate approach to build and sustain technical capacity needed to operate the GBFF and support the implementation of BBNJ. So thank you for that move. Germany also welcomes the GEF reform initiative. That's an excellent initiative and associated increases in terms of cost, efficiency and effectiveness of GEF operations. We heard with concern during the interview process with Centennial Consultants, GEF Secretariat is working at the limit of human capacity, and we urge the GEF CEO to take the respective measures, as he's already doing so, to ensure workplace health and the capacity to deliver to the challenging mandates that GEF was given by the various conventions. Thank you very much for that. We also thank the GEF Secretariat for its explanations on the current status of discussions regarding the lease contract. We want to underline that it is not within the realm of the World Bank to decide on the location or relocation of the GEF Secretariat, as this is a matter that lies entirely within the decision-making power of the Council. The Secretariat and also some members of the Council were only informed about the lease process in the very last minutes of last year. And then the ensuing process was more than confusing for everyone. We also would like to support your suggestion to come to a conclusion as quickly as possible and use, like the US suggested, the possibly good timing now during the Washington summer to actually sign a lease with the landlord, a long-term lease with the landlord to give as much reliability and foreseeability to this matter as possible. We also understand the GEF Secretariat's discontentment with the current discussion on the cost recovery reform. We propose to hear about the proposal from the World Bank with detailed underlying calculations. It is not clear why the World Bank couldn't make it to this GEF Council meeting in order to explain these calculations now when we're actually having this budget in front of us for decision making. So we do expect the World Bank to come to the Council in the next meeting, actually explain that in detail, because we are all quite clear about what this entails. To any sort of increase in the budget, that means automatically that we will have reduced capacities to deliver. So this needs to be explained in detail and also made, while we do understand that the World Bank needs to follow board instructions, this should be done in a transparent and sensible manner. Also, we need to hear about the process that lies behind that, because if it had been a timely proposal from the World Bank last year while we were drawing up the budget for GEF 8, we could have included that in an orderly manner and actually avoided all this confusion now. Ultimately, we might be able to support an increase up to 11%, but that is totally reliant on the presentation and of the calculations and the actual use of World Bank services. And I want to be very clear about this. Scarce GEF resources should be used for country programming instead of unjustified cost increases. And finally, for us, it's really important to hear about possible legal consequences if the negotiations that probably continue with the World Bank are not satisfactory. Is there any possibility the World Bank has legally to implement its supposed budget increases anyway without Council decision? Is there any risk involved that we need to be aware of that? Is there any sort of escalation scenario we need to be aware of? And also the US suggested that this increase might only be for next year, and then we have to see again based on further calculations. So is there a chance to do that? And if so, how does it look like? And also, is there any risk that the World Bank might want to retroactively apply the increase, which has further implications for the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annette. Richard from Australia.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the information being presented on the budget. First of all, we support the broader recommendations and the proposed approach. We recognise that there's a significant work program this year and the need for additional resources. So I think that reflects that need, and we support that. On a number of specific points, they've been covered already quite extensively, but some specific things I wanted to add. First of all, support the idea on the indirect costs that this is reflected in the Council decision. There's a suggestion that the World Bank come to the next meeting, which I support. In addition to that, I think it would be beneficial if there's a request from the World Bank to provide some written information to Council ahead of that meeting, so we can get a detailed understanding of what's actually on the table, so we can ask more informed questions at that time. Ideally, that would be at least a month before the next Council meeting to allow sufficient time for that analysis. Just on a couple of other questions related to that. First of all, on the Secretariat has provided or got information about to justify a 7% charge. It's very unclear to me if the World Bank has comparable data to justify an amount of 11% and above. So whilst I'd be supportive of a cap on the 11%, whatever it is, it needs to be justified based on the actual situation. As much as it's easy to claim a methodology as a basis for indirect costs are measurable. So it's not simple. I don't think we can accept a situation where the World Bank just swipes it away and says this is a broader proposition and needs to be justified. On the energy efficiency, support that and the greening, the approach, whatever the possibilities are that could be explored. On the lease, there's a number of points that have been made around that. My question or request of the Secretariat is, irrespective of the outcome, what I'd appreciate is information if there's any proposal from the World Bank to put forward a lease arrangement at a cost that's above the market rate. Particularly if there's a significant premium. Whilst it's in the purview of the Council to make a decision on the accommodation for the World Bank, for the Secretariat, we don't want to be forced in a position where we're paying a significant premium as a result of that. So having that information would be beneficial. In terms of the Council arrangements, support the alternating arrangements and the clarification about the meetings taking place in DC. On the virtual meetings, it's a request or a plea that the consideration be given to looking at the timing of those virtual meetings, so they're not always at the same time. There's equity issues in terms of capacity for different countries to participate in those meetings, and the Asia and Pacific region in particular gets the raw end of the deal on a consistent basis. So a plea that there's some consideration to alternating the timing of those meetings to reflect the differential impact and on representation at the Council meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So Ben is next, and then after that, we'll turn over to Peter. Just for people to know, I have Karen Ikuko, Laura from Mexico, and then Victor from Brazil after that. And I don't see any other flags. If after that we go and do another historic session of the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. So thank you, everyone. Ben.
Yeah, many thanks, Tom, and many thanks, Peter, for the presentation. Firstly, just to say that we welcome the review from the GEF Secretariat of Resourcing and proposed restructuring. As Germany mentioned, I think this is clearly very much overdue due to the increased work under GEF 8 and other new initiatives that GEF is currently picking up. As Switzerland has flagged, I mean, it's useful to understand where the within that restructuring where staffing is on taking forward the risk innovation workstream, which we've looked at previously and hasn't been taken forward potentially because of limitations in setting up a working group with STAP. So we look forward to the presentation later on this week on those issues and bring up some of those issues further then. Turning to the hot topic of the admin rate, Peter talked about potentially looking forward to the negotiations under GEF 9 in terms of maybe setting something so we can discuss it there. I would also point out that we had a negotiation under GEF 8, and it would be really helpful if you could just tell us what percentage was agreed under GEF 8 for that admin fee, which clearly hasn't been settled or agreed to as we go forward. World Bank were part of those discussions, as others have said, so it's not clear why it wasn't raised at that time. As others have said, Switzerland and India, it would have been useful, and it will be useful to hear from the World Bank, particularly on this issue. And that would be particularly the case if they have the ability to, as Annette was asking, to impose anything on GEF. And it'd be useful to hear, particularly before they do that, if they have any intention to do so, as Annette has also raised. It'd be also useful to understand any implications for financial year 23, and also maybe just tell us what the percentage rate was for that in financial year 23. So again, if any sort of retrospective applying that has been discussed or not on that one. Clearly, this is an issue which hasn't been resolved yet. If you're hearing communication about it yesterday, we as council members, we have to look at this and we have to have discussions, particularly, for example, with our World Bank ED counterparts, and we clearly can't do that if we're only hearing about this today. So the timing is not ideal for us to be able to take sensible decisions on this. Turning to the other issue in terms of office, yes, it'd be useful if we can finalize that and move forward on this. Clearly, that shouldn't be getting in the way of GEF 8 implementation. I think I agree with others that it'd be really helpful if a decision text mentioned both of those issues on office and admin rates, so that it's very clear in terms of what this council is talking about. We agree with the US, others have mentioned that the GEF resources which have been agreed should be used for GEF 8 replenishment implementation. There's a significant implementation that needs to be taken forward. And I think also agree with the US, it'd be very useful to look at the scheduling within the international calendar of future council meetings. I'll leave it there. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Peter?
Thank you. Thanks very much for the follow-up interventions and questions and thoughts. We really appreciate it. Let me try and go through them. I've taken good notes. Thank you, China, for in principle agreeing with the budget. I think several other folks also have recognized the need for additional investment in capacity and resources. And there were, I think you had asked, if I on my notes here, if there's a standard rate on indirect costs for FIFs, financial intermediary funds at the World Bank, and then is there a backup plan for the GEF? So there was an update to the cost recovery framework at the World Bank in the last couple of years, and so it was 22% or 28%. That was, I think, the two benchmark figures that were agreed that would be applied. For the GEF, there was one, the reason it went to 18%, which is presented in the document, and the main reason for that is because the World Bank did recognize that we pay for our office costs separately. And so and that would otherwise be one of the regular costs of the indirect charge. So this is where you're finding 18% with that, and some consideration in that category. You asked about a backup plan for this. I think that's what we've been discussing, which is if we have a council decision, then we take that back and hopefully it can lead the way to an expeditious resolution. Let us hope so. We hope so. And that's what we're trying to achieve here, to make this problem be resolved so we can focus on what we all really need to focus on. The implications of a council decision, I mean, if we want, we could ask, the World Bank Legal Counsel is here, but, and Julianne, but I could just mention, and there were some questions about whether, would it be possible for the World Bank to impose simply a charge rate, even if the GEF Council had come to a different decision and the Secretariat showed analysis which didn't have the same, didn't find an agreement on that. What I can say is so far that has not happened. And we do appreciate this, that we have been, even it's been an extended dialogue. And there was the major part of it began late last year. Early in 2022, this was when I recall a communication, certainly one of the communications about the cost recovery rate, the 18%. We got back with our explanations. You might remember a year ago at Council we said we were in ongoing dialogue. We've had that dialogue, and the new rate, it has not been applied to us. So our hope and understanding would be that this would be worked out cooperatively, so that wouldn't be a situation. But of course, you know, we have to work diligently to hopefully find the right solution. And Laura, thank you for mentioning again that 11% seems upper limit, and we are reporting intercessionally to Council and support for the increased investment and efficiency and more for focus on results. Thank you very much. Annette, thanks very much for the comments and the points that you raised. Welcoming the budget, recognizing the additional work of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. We mentioned that in our budget paper. Indeed, it's been a lot, and for you too, I think, including today. And the idea of as we increase staff, we reduce consultants, that's built in. The GEF Reform Initiative. I appreciate your point about this is not for the World Bank to decide on the location or relocation of the GEF Secretariat. That's for GEF Council, very much so. It's a governance point. We think so too. This is in the interest of the GEF Council and what the GEF Council's needs are, and appreciate your support for the signing and getting back to the long-term lease renewal that we negotiated last year. It was a good deal. It met our needs. It would have kept us in place. There would be an enormous cost of changing places. We put a table in the annex to the budget document, which also tried to give a comparative cost picture of what we heard from the World Bank, which was a communication from the managing director, which was based on average costs of World Bank facilities, and we mentioned that in the annex compared to the cost picture of our current offices. The question about I think a couple of questions came about what if we go to 11%, that's the decision, and Juha mentioned, you know, the issues and the potential impacts on the Independent Evaluation Office. What we've presented in our document is a decision at 11%, which goes to $3 million, 300% increase from last year, combined with a decision, if Council approves it, to take some of the underruns from the GEF 7 administrative budget to be applied to cover that increased cost. You might remember at the beginning of our budget document, in the first table, it shows that in GEF 7, the Secretariat had a budget envelope in the replenishment of $103.5 million. We actually had underruns of about $10 million, mainly due to the pandemic, which reduced travel costs, meeting costs, but also because of efficiencies and things like that. And so what we're suggesting to make this all work, to fit the pieces of the puzzle together, so that it wouldn't interfere with the capacity needs of the Secretariat, and thank everybody for saying that we can't let that happen in delivery of GEF 8, is to apply those underruns as needed so we can keep the business going forward. And so for this year, you'll see it's a $2 million of that almost $10 million that would be part of the decision that would be applied in that way. On retroactive application, I think Annette, you asked that, and I think Ben also asked that question about, because yes, getting a communication yesterday and informing you, it doesn't leave a chance for discussion. It was also the same for us. It was a clarification from a communication that was sent earlier. But we wanted to bring it just for information purposes. But it did include, in the one that we received from the Budget Office 10 days ago and then clarified yesterday, the proposal to apply a retroactive charge or a charge retroactively to the FY23 budget at 11%. Their proposal going forward is higher than that, but it would be 11%. And just to explain, because I think there was a question about how does that compare to the rate that we were paying in FY23. In FY23, the Secretariat was not paying an indirect rate charge. We were on a different system, which was direct payment. And so we paid directly for IT support, legal services, budget support, and these other things. And so this, by applying this backwards to FY23, it would be a different charging system. And it would be, you can calculate the amount, 11% compared to the FY23 budget. It would be considerably higher than the amount that Council authorized last year in its decision on the GEF budget for the two items of cross support and IT support that we were paying directly. We mentioned, I mean, I think we mentioned just now that this raises questions of, you know, it's unusual for a retroactive application. There's governance issues, and again, it's above what was authorized last year. Richard, Australia, about the possibility of the World Bank coming in December, providing more detail. Thank you for supporting the investments in the budget going forward on the rest of this document, which we really want to keep our eye on because it's super important for the work we have for the partnership. On the energy efficiency, thank you for supporting that. I didn't mention earlier we were working on solar panels in the rooftop. We're also, thanks to our CEO, we're getting rid of single-use plastics every which way that we can. We don't, you know, we also have done that at council, so no more, you know, of course, water bottles and things like that. And so we're trying to do, and also carbon, yeah. The tax. And the tax, this is also a policy coherence finding, yeah. So the costing of the World Bank office proposals I mentioned, what we know is that they had provided based on average World Bank costs, and that's in the Annex 1 explanation, the comparative cost picture. Yeah, I think Ben had asked also, yeah, here we go. On the location of the council meetings, and Abby had mentioned this U.S. earlier, but it's also come up from several others, that we did want to clarify the language that we had in the text. The idea would be rotations, so there would be a virtual meeting, and then there might be the meeting in D.C., or it could be in a recipient country. We would work that out together with council. Here's an example of doing it in another country outside of the United States, which is also fantastic because it creates opportunities to visit GEF projects, and we have in the country engagement strategy of funding support to make that possible. So, but yes, rotation indeed. And on the time zone issues, Richard, thank you for mentioning that, the very late middle of the night hours. So we will take note. We have a logistics team. We appreciate it, and we want to make sure that virtual meetings don't put some of us at a complete inability to really participate and having to spend the night. So thanks a lot, if I understood your comment, for raising that. I think, Ben, you asked, in addition to mentioning the risk innovation work stream going to be discussed later, yes, the investment, we want to make sure we have the expertise for that, and the welcoming of the general budget. You know, about the time frame, what was agreed at GEF 8, you know, the World Bank was, of course, in a general way engaged in the GEF 8 replenishment negotiations. We had begun in earnest the discussions on the change in the indirect cost rate early last year. And that was when we had the back and forth about 18%, and then our analysis progressively that we thought that was too high, and we mentioned that we were in dialogue last year. So the timing was not easy to put it into the GEF 8 replenishment, though there were folks there. And so that was, in a way, when I mentioned earlier looking ahead to GEF 9, it was more in the spirit of let's, you know, if we agree now on a rate of 11%, or which is what we're recommending, but there's still a need maybe on one side or the other to make sure we've got it right, we're expressing an openness to that because we want to be, you know, fair and get to the right solution. Yeah, I think that's it from me. Carlos Manuel, would you like to come in? Yeah, thanks.
So I think it's safe to say that there's a chorus of support for all of your hard work and blood and sweat to resolve these intractable issues. Just to let you know,
Karen Ikuko, Laura from Mexico, Victor from Brazil, and the technicians, please be ready for Gisela from Italy. And last is Corentin from Belgium. So, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation by the Secretariat. Sweden can, as many others have expressed, support the business plan and the budget as presented. It really makes sense given the size of the GEF 8 replenishment. But as also been, everything will have been mentioned by others probably, but we need a long-term solution obviously to both the least and the cost recovery issue. We support the questions that have been raised by China, Germany, UK and others regarding the cost recovery rate, the World Bank calculations, which is unclear to us as well, and the risk if the World Bank don't agree to the decision taken by the Council. And we appreciate the responses given by Peter here. But it's clear that many issues are still unresolved. We support the suggestion by the US and Switzerland to add text in the decision referring to the office lease and the 11% being the max cost recovery for next fiscal year. We support the decision to have a mix of virtual and in-person council meetings. That was also mentioned by Norway. But we also suggest that we revisit this decision over time if needed. I mean, there are, also with the current process of the GBFF fund, we can just, I mean, we know that some issues are just very difficult to settle in virtual meetings, so we need to be able to revisit that, but in principle we agree. Lastly, as was also mentioned by US, I think we think it's very important that GEF work and budget focus as much as possible on the implementation of the GEF 8 and not too much on new work streams such as GBFF and BBNJ, and that those work streams as soon as possible should bear their own costs. That's also said in the budget, I think, but we just want to emphasize that. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Ikuko from Japan.
Thank you so much for the business plan and budget documents and also for the presentation by the Secretariat. Japan also supports the proposed business plan and budget for fiscal year 24. We commend our Secretariat's hard work to keep the budget within the envelope agreed upon in the GEF 8. In spite of the need to cope with increase of World Bank admin support fee and the need to implement wider agenda under GEF 8. Including the implementation of the new GBF fund or the BBNJ. Having said that, as others have also already pointed out, the news on the new full cost recovery request from the World Bank a couple of minutes ago was a surprise for us as well. And as others have mentioned, it is necessary for us to get more information, get clarity on this fee issue. And we appreciate further information on this respect. Also, thank you for the explanation on the cost recovery by the management. It was very useful. I'm not quite sure if I heard correctly, but I think you mentioned that the management intends to review the World Bank admin fee in 3 years' time? No? Sorry.
I was sorry, just to come in, I was more saying that we collectively together, you know, in terms of how it applies to the GEF, we could consider at some later date if we got it right, you know, if 11% is correct.
Okay,
so, yeah.
all right, thank you. Okay. So I also, so that's about it for the admin fee. And as for the format of the meetings, I echo the voice by Australia, Richard, on the time zone issue. And we very much agree with the points raised and appreciate the Secretariat's cooperation for the future virtual meetings. We also support the proposal by the US on the office space. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ikuko. Laura from Mexico.
I'll be very quick. First, I do want to support the business plan. I want to say I would rather include a specific language, specific text on the cap approved by the council for the negotiation, as well as on the office lease for a long term. I do not want to go out without thanking the staff involved in the decision and the process of negotiating the office space, because it really came at a poor time for any individual, but also you managed to keep the process of GEF 8, which in the end is what is important. And in this matter, I do have a question, and maybe it's, I think I heard, and at this point I don't know if it was from you, that you'd be willing to reopen the negotiation even with the bank after XFY, and I do wonder, like, we need some certainty for each GEF replenishment, so this cannot come at any random fiscal year, and so yeah, that's kept in mind. Thank you.
So I just heard from him, the CEO, that he loves your intervention. Anyways, Victor from Brazil, let's continue the love.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I'll try to be brief, as the main issues have already been addressed by many of my colleagues regarding this 11% intended increase in the loan by the World Bank. So I'll skip that. Brazil's, Colombia, and Ecuador's constituency praises the work of the Secretariat. Thank you for your efforts. We are glad to see some of programs that we value pretty much reflected in the budget. Country support program, country strategy engagement. We share the views of Sweden and others regarding council meetings. That is to say that we might revisit it later. We should be flexible. I think both budget concerns as well as the issues before us should guide these decisions. Some council meetings are lighter than others, and the GBF fund will add to the GEF's council itself. In any case, we find it interesting to rotate the location and to repeat, as you did, the site visits. I myself could not join the visit last week. I was involved with the participation of our ministers and vice ministers in the opening, but I think and many others could not come because all busy, so it's only natural. But I think as an idea, like to bring the council members to actually see for themselves site visits is a very good idea, to avoid that we lose sight of what is going on in the field as a consequence of the decisions and debates we hold in the council meeting. So I think it's a good initiative. Brazil is very proud, very happy to be the first to hold this meeting outside of DC, and we are very much looking forward to see it in other countries and coupled with other visits. The Secretariat reform, I would ask many questions, but I understand there's this informal lunch planned, so I will keep my curiosity for them. And one of the things you will probably address, but in any case, I will just mention here, you don't need to respond today, I will wait for tomorrow, but one of the things that is very dear now to our new government, which is in the draft decision, is like the engaging with civil society, indigenous people and local communities, women, youth, private sector, and so on. So that's part of the decision, and I do hope you address that in the presentation over lunch tomorrow, if I understood correctly. And last, I understand the people you were gonna hire, the process follow the World Bank procedures and rules. If you could just very briefly indicate how it is. I understand it's an open bid, and is there any announcements? Maybe the GEF Secretariat could inform the Council so that we can spread the word around our countries and constituencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. So Gisela from Zoom, Italy. Yes, louder, please.
Great, thank you. Very briefly, I would like to welcome the presentation made by Peter and thanks the Secretariat for the efforts to present this business plan and corporate budget that in general terms we agree on. We think that really reflects the enhanced and more demanding mission of the GEF. In particular, Italy appreciates the continuous efforts by the Secretariat to put in place a cost-efficient management with the objective to reduce costs where feasible. Like others, I want to echo my colleagues expressing concerns on the cost recovery. And I can go along with the approval of 11% as an upper limit for cost recovery for next year. And of course, I support strongly the Gabriela and Abby's proposal to include a wording in the decision accordingly. My final point is on this issue of the cost recovery. This problem is a very common problem. I mean, is common to all the FIF in this last period. And the big problem is the unclear explanation, the absence of clarity and transparency by the World Bank as trustee in giving us explanation, let us understand why they request this increase so sadly. So I strongly support having the World Bank at the next council meeting to explain us in detail. I support Richard's proposal to have a written explanation well in time, at least a month before the council meeting, because it's hard for most of us to completely understand these very complicated issues. And as a final suggestion, if I may, I wonder if Carlos Manuel and the Secretariat could cooperate and work together with the other FIF, because perhaps coming into a negotiation with the World Bank altogether could help in achieving, I don't know, some good results, at least a kind of similar and clear methodology with the different, of course, let's say numbers, because we are not talking about this the same FIF. I mean, each of the FIF has very specific characteristics, but perhaps this could help. I mean, having a common front line could be a solution, but it's just a suggestion. And very final point, Carlos Manuel, really would appreciate if I could receive any summary or the presentation you will make tomorrow at the lunch. I'm sorry not to be with you all in Brasilia, but of course, Italy is very much interested in this restructuring of the GEF. Thank you.
Thank you, Gisela. We do miss you too. So, Corentin, the last contribution.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for this corporate budget and for updating us on the latest development with the World Bank. Concerning the document, let me raise 3 quick points. We, of course, invite you to pursue the negotiations with the World Bank to solve the problem as soon as possible and in the best interest of the GEF. In this matter, we support the idea to have a relevant text about the office lease situation in the decision text, such as on the 11 charge rate, to be considered as a maximum. And indeed, the World Bank could have come here today to present her calculation or at least share a document addressing this as a matter of transparency and accountability. Also, we take note that thanks to a recent review of the World Bank portfolio, 79 million are now available to the partnership as unused funds from the World Bank portfolio, and this is a considerable amount. The document explains these funds could be used to cover the additional costs due to the possible 11% charge rate. But even if we use it to cover these additional costs, amounting to 7 million, there would still remain 72 million. And you guess my question, perhaps, how do you intend to reallocate this important amount? And actually, I heard there might be much more money coming from unused funds identified via other reviews of agencies' portfolio. So could you consider to inform us on this at a later council so that we can discuss how these unused funds could be reallocated? And on the council meetings, we also find interesting the Secretariat's proposal about the alternance of meetings in virtual mode and in person. And we also wanted to propose to alternate the venue of the councils in person. So to have it once in DC, Washington DC, and once in a developing country. We believe this practice is likely to increase the visibility of the GEF, but also to modernize its image beyond its new logo, which I love, which I like very much. And at the same time, we are mindful of the additional costs of organizing councils outside Washington, D.C., so it's important to find the good balance and to keep a certain flexibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Corentin. Peter.
Well, thank you all very much again for the last comments and contributions and very important points on these issues. We're covering some of the issues, similar issues, but also with some new points that are very important. Thanks, Karen Sweden, on supporting the business plan and the budget, the need for the longer-term solution on these issues, you know, the risks that we're facing. Yes, indeed. This is why we want to see if we can get a decision. Hopefully that will help lead this way to have this be resolved as soon as possible. And supporting rotation, virtual, but being a little bit aware of too many virtual. I think you said, you know, that sometimes there are issues with virtual meetings, so we have to make sure we calculate that in. In person, for example, the kind of discussions we're having today is quite, I suppose, quite critical. And again, the main focus on GEF 8 delivery, that yes, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, once established, would follow the same model as LDCF, the other family of trust funds, that it would be budgeting for the support for that. But in the meantime, as mentioned in the budget paper, there's a lot of work to put it together, a lot of staff needs, and so that's a little bit the short term and then the longer term, but absolutely. Thank you, Japan, Ikuko, for the support and the appreciation of the efforts. We appreciate the efforts too, all around. More clarity on the fee. I hope I was able to explain a little bit how all of this has come about and what the analysis, at least as we see it, and how the World Bank. I mean, we know to some extent what's going on at the World Bank in the cost recovery dialogue, but it's not our dialogue, it's their dialogue. And so being engaged, we try to be engaged and seek to be engaged as much as possible. The time zone issue. And thank you for the support for some of the other, agreeing with, I think, the United States and others on the office space issue. And to the extent there's more explicit language, and many mentioned about the long-term lease renewal stability, that would be really most welcome from our side. Yeah, Laura from Mexico, you know, our CEO, I think, was also appreciating this, you know, some of the points, which, and I want to start with the one when you mentioned, when you said, I think it was something to the effect, do we really want to reopen the discussion on indirect trade in 3 years? And maybe that's what Ben was saying too, and I take the point. I mean, no, we really don't. We'd like to get it resolved in a fair way so that it works going forward for as long as possible. All we're saying is that we could recognize if there's still some level of not total alignment between everybody that's involved, that maybe that would give some comfort if at least there's a possibility to say, hey, we didn't quite get it right. But what you said is, point well taken. Thank you for mentioning the, I think it was about safekeeping GEF 8, the investment to make sure that we're actually doing what we need to do to deliver GEF 8 and to have everything and the engagement and all the things we've talked about in our budget paper. And I think you also mentioned the cap on 11% and the long-term lease as part of that solution, which I hear from a lot of folks. Victor, Brazil, thank you for mentioning the reflections in the document about the country engagement strategy and the other priorities, working with the stakeholders, civil society, our partners, and indigenous communities. Yes, we wanted to put high emphasis on that. It's part of the GEF 8 agenda. And so, we're wanting to invest so we can follow through. And on this question about revisiting, the meeting venue, be flexible. The idea of rotation, is what we're trying to say, and thank you for mentioning that you're proud to be first. We're grateful to be here, and so so thank you very much. It's just been the greatest. Let's see. Oh, you asked about, yes, we're going to be hiring. That's part of the budget plan. And so there is a system that we follow, both the GEF, but also as part of the larger announcement system through the World Bank system, where the positions will be announced. I can check with the folks in the system to see if there would be a way to circulate those broadly to countries, to council members, to whomever, to make That's the plan. All right, and Carlos Manuel can speak more about that to spread the word, because we're looking, to staff up from everywhere, get the best folks, be a diverse secretariat, and meet the needs, and there are plenty of them. From Italy, thank you for mentioning the work and the efforts. Yes, we put a high emphasis on efficiency. I think you mentioned also, like many others, looking at 11% as an upper limit for the next year as part of the decision. And, questions about the transparency and the information of some of the other levels of details in this dialogue. You asked about whether the CEO can work more closely or can work with other FIFs. GPE and I don't know if Carlos Manuel wants to speak about that, and the SIFs. We are in touch. We have some differences, but we're also a little bit in the same boat. We know that, and we hear that they're facing some of these same issues too, and so it helps us to compare notes, and so thanks for mentioning that. And I think lastly, there was the last, I think Belgium, Corentin, thank you very much for asking us, indeed inviting us to pursue the follow-up with the World Bank so we can make all this have all this resolved in support for the relevant text in the decision. You mentioned the $79 million. We have a couple of places in our document. This is an important point. Thanks for mentioning it. I mean, actually what has happened is part of our GEF 8 commitment to have an enhanced portfolio review and management. One of the things that our team has done has been in bilateral discussions with the agencies, and this was with the World Bank, to look at questions about whether there are any funds remaining at financial closure, these kinds of things. And in this case, that's explained in the document, what I have learned from the team is there were actually a great percentage of this is reflows. These were blended finance projects with an NGI component from the GEF. And so there were reflows that, if I understand it well, the team is over there, that had come back and that needed still to be returned back to the GEF Trust Fund. And so the dialogue bilaterally with the World Bank and the team, after financial closure, these funds were available. It's a considerable amount of money. In that sense, it's very good news. and also the fact that there were reflows. I think it was 85% of the total is something maybe in that category. But then the question of how to use that money. And that maybe that's a way to maybe wrap up a little bit from my side, because many folks, or some of the interventions said we want to find a way to work out the indirect cost issue and these issues without cutting the capacity to deliver the work program, to have the resources that we need to do that, and also for the Independent Evaluation Office. In the budget decision before you, the first way to do that is with the GEF 7 underruns, which we had. And so that would be part of the decision to apply a portion of the $10 million to cover the increase in cost. But we also have this additional funds, and we mentioned it as a potential source in case at some point we might need it to make sure we can meet that, core commitment to deliver. As far as the rest of the funds, that would only take a small part of it. And so I think that was your main question. And I just chatted with the CEO, and he wanted me to convey that he and I are in discussions. We're in discussions, and we would like to present something in December at Council on a plan of how to utilize those resources. And I think they might not be the only ones. If I understand from our results team, there will be additional engagements with other agencies to see if there are some projects that have been financially closed. There might still be some unutilized and unallocated funding. This is unutilized and unallocated funding, and I think that the disbursements were very high, so it's not a reflection on anything like that, but it is money available, and we'll come back to you on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. So without further ado, given all of your comments to date, may I invite Council to adopt the draft decision, including in the document GEF C6403 Revision 1 with 3 additions. 1, as per the will of Council. 1 is that Council calls upon the IBRD to work with the GEF Secretariat on the lease issue. 2nd, Council considers the 11% as a ceiling, upper limit. 3rd, Council asks the IBRD to come to the next Council meeting. We will clean up the text, and we will include it in the co-chair summary for our consideration on Thursday. Yes.
Just one small addition to the final point about the World Bank coming to the next meeting. One of the suggestions I made was to have the World Bank provide a report before that meeting, and I'm just wondering if that could be incorporated.
We will add that. Just make sure William has the exact text. And Senate.
Thanks very much. Yeah, that sounds good. For me, it's just unclear if that the 11% is the upper limit. So there's negotiation ongoing, and if the 11% are reached in an agreement, we still don't know whether it's actually justified or not. So we would have to have the figures before we take a decision. So I assume the decision about the actual budget is then in the next Council. I'm not sure whether I'm making myself clear, but I mean, we give the Secretariat the permission to negotiate up to 11%. But I'd really like to see the underlying calculations from the World Bank in order to have that as a justified basis for making this decision. So
You're correct, Annette. This is exactly what we need. Yeah. We need a decision that from Council that establish very clearly what is the cap that we have. I've been insisting on the information from the bank with regards to the rationale and the criteria to get to that proposal that we have received. As a matter of fact, I have even proposed to the World Bank that we should ask an independent specialist, expert, to assess the process, and they have denied those requests. At this moment, I'm very solid on my position on the 7%. And this is what I said in my last exchange with the World Bank. Nevertheless, in terms, and it has been explained by Peter, the 11% is what we recommend in this budget paper, so we can be flexible and find that common area. But at this point, based on the consistent pushback that we have received from the World Bank, my last exchange with them was, well, 7% is what the numbers indicate to us, and we present the numbers to the World Bank, which is something that we haven't received from their side.
So thanks very much for the explanation. So can we include in the decision text that this is based on a transparent calculation from the World Bank? I mean, we need more transparency about their figures and why they do that. And I very much appreciate your argument about the 7%. Is that Tom is looking at me quizzically.
Yes,
Sorry,
as Tom indicated, we'll be working on a language that fulfills your request.
Okay. Great, thanks.
So, Alf.
Yes, and we would also like to include in the decision text that states that the Secretariat should report back to Council, also in between meetings on development, to keep us informed as things develop.
So, the decision of Council is to adopt the draft decision included in document GEF C6403 revision 1 with the amendments of Council calling on the IBRD to work with the GEF Secretariat on the office lease issue. And Council also considers the 11% to be an upper limit with the appropriate language on transparency. Council also calls on the Secretariat to report on progress in between. Finally, this is where I think it was Richard's, Council calls on, could you help me out?
The World Bank to provide a report to explain
yes,
the indirect cost issue. I think there's a question mark over the lease, whether we want the report to also include the lease issue, which I think would be useful as a basis for the World Bank to attend the next council meeting to enable discussion.
We will add that as well. So with all of those additions, I invite the Council to adopt the draft decision with those amendments. All good? Thank you. As per the will of the Council, the Secretariat has made available the same room until 7 or more, if we so need it, in order to continue our historic journey to build this new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. And as foreshadowed by our wonderful CEO, tomorrow we start bright and early at 8 a.m. I lost the fight for 7 a.m., by the way. William said, no way. And so let us adjourn for today, and let's reconvene in that room. When would you like? 5 o'clock or 4:45? 4:45 is about 15 minutes. 4:45, going once, going twice, sold. 4:45, same room.